Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm so pumped you're with us today because we get to talk with an expert about how to use business storytelling to not only just attract the absolute best talent, but to eliminate employee churn, to keep them around. Believe it or not, the power of story is the secret to keeping your people on for the long run. Check it out on today's special edition of the Business of Story. Before we get started, I have some news for you. Now, over the past 4 weeks, I have had a number of people ask me about starting a mastermind group for the Business of Story. I even had one lady send me an email about joining a mastermind. Given that I didn't even know her, I asked her how she knew about me. She said her boss had taken one of my trainings 3 years ago and encouraged her to reach out, given how impactful that training was for her. So I've been asking many people what they would like to get out of a Business of Story mastermind. Some have even encouraged me to do a mastermind/training hybrid or simply a peer group. I had no idea how differently people view these kinds of ongoing gatherings of brilliant business minds. So I have a question for you. If you were to join a Business of Story mastermind, what would it look like? What would you want to achieve by being a member? Would you want to be a part of a small group? I'm talking like maybe 8 to 10 to 12 people, like-minded executives. Or are you more interested in one of those larger masterminds? Could be as many as 50 to 100 to 150 people. Are you interested in additional storytelling training for your brand, sales, and marketing? Or would you be happy with just simply getting with a group of like-minded business people so you could share your opportunities and your challenges with them to get their insights on it? How often would you like to meet? Weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly? Would you like one-on-one time with me or a monthly office hour where a bunch of us would jump on a Zoom to answer any questions? What would be the most important thing to get out of a mastermind? Are you into it for networking, for insights on how to make your brand, sales, and marketing communications stronger, how to learn the and, but, therefore, the 5 primal elements of a short story or the story cycle system? All of these questions have been racing around my head, and I've had a chance to reach out to a number of my trusted advisors to get their insights. And I got to tell you, they're all across the board. So I would love to hear from you. If you would take the time and you have some interest in a mastermind, would you send me your thoughts on what would be most valuable for you? You can just send it over to my email address at park@businessofstory.com. Now, I'm looking to launch this group in early 2024, so your input is huge at this point. If you're interested in learning more, then just send me a note with your thoughts to park@businessofstory.com. Thank you in advance for your thoughts. I really greatly appreciate them. Now, on today's show, we have for you the author of Never Lose an Employee Again, The Simple Path to Remarkable Retention, Joey Coleman, who shares how to use your stories to eliminate employee churn in your enterprise.
And I think this is where many businesses struggle. They either make their story all about the vision and the mission, or all about the tactics and the evidence. And again, it's not that either is bad, it's that you need a blend of both if you really want to succeed.
Joey Coleman helps companies keep their customers and employees. As an award-winning speaker, he works with organizations around the world, ranging from small startups to major brands such as Volkswagen Australia, Zappos, and Whirlpool. His first 100 days methodology fuels the remarkable experiences his clients deliver and dramatically improves their profits. His 2 books have received critical acclaim, and both were instant Wall Street Journal bestsellers. Never Lose a Customer Again offers strategies and tactics for turning one-time purchasers into lifelong customers. And his newest book, Never Lose an Employee Again details a framework companies around the world can use to reduce turnover and increase employee engagement. Joey says that the more you can see the story from the other person's point of view, the more you can create experiences that will keep your desired audience engaged and interested. We discuss how to get clear on your audience and which part of that audience is being served by which story, how to find a balance between unique details and extraneous information in your stories, and how boomeranging a story is a great way to create a remarkable experience for your audience. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Joey Coleman. Hi, Joey. Welcome to the Business of Story.
Oh, Park, thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everybody who's listening in. I'm super excited for our conversation today.
You know, I've got to thank Phil Mershon of Social Media Marketing World, Social Media Examiner, the folks that produce Social Media Marketing World, because I've seen you in action there. I've been there presenting over the course of the last 7 or so years, and said, hey, man, can you connect us? He did. You graciously said, I'm coming on the show, and we are going to cover a topic we have never covered before in the 8 years of the Business of Story. And that, Joey, of course, is how in the world do you use storytelling and coach and train your customers to use storytelling to attract and retain top talent? Big question, right?
Big
Where
question,
would you like
but an
to begin
exciting
with that?
question. Well, I'll first begin by agreeing and thanking Phil for the kind introduction to get us connected. And yes, it's an aspect of story in business that I think often gets overlooked because we're so focused as business owners, as leaders, as salespeople, as managers, to think about the story we're telling externally. How do we attract in new customers? How do we connect customers with our mission, our vision, what we're trying to accomplish? And as a result, we sometimes give short shrift to the conversation around how do we make sure our people are part of our story? What are the stories we're telling our team members and new hires and prospective employees about our organization that will draw them in, that will connect them to our mission, our vision, what we're trying to accomplish?
What are the biggest mistakes that employees or employers make about retaining that employee? What do you see so often that, man, they're stepping in their own bear trap and they don't even know it?
Well, Park, I don't think we have 38 hours for today's show, but what I will tell you some of the top ones are, and the main one, which I think connects directly to our conversation today, is that many employers don't realize that the journey with an employee starts before you hire them. And it continues throughout the entire time they are in your employ, as well as beyond, should they leave to go work somewhere else or retire. And I think the opportunity for every business is to think about the stories we're telling in our marketing materials to attract new talent, the stories we're telling in our job descriptions, on the careers page on our website, the About Us page, the stories we're telling in interviews, the stories we're telling when we extend a job offer, the stories we tell when somebody shows up for the first day of work, the second day, the 5th day, the 38th day, the 100th day, the story we tell when someone gets promoted, the story we tell when someone doesn't get promoted, the story we tell when they take on new responsibilities, and frankly, the story we tell when they either decide to retire or take a position with another organization. Every moment in the employee journey is an opportunity to consciously craft the story that we're sharing.
Can you give us an example of that? Because you threw out a lot of different places in that journey to tell a story. And I know people, they'll say, all right, that's great, dude, but give me an example. What kind of story? Where do I find these stories? How do I tell these stories?
Well, as you well know, Park, it's one thing to find a story. It's another thing to get clear on your story. So I think the first place we have to start is, what is the story we want to tell as an organization? And then think about, in what mediums do we want to tell that story? So let me give you some examples to practically illustrate that. There is a restaurant in Singapore called the Dallas Restaurant and Bar. Now, the Dallas Restaurant and Bar in Singapore serves steak. I guess if you're in Singapore and you want to name a steakhouse, you name it after a city in Texas, right?
That makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And what's interesting is they have an advertisement that was published in the newspaper seeking employees to apply for a position. Now, at the top of the advertisement, it's hard to do this verbally when you're on a podcast, but at the top of the advertisement, it has kind of a bunch of letters swirled together that don't really make sense. And at the bottom, it says, if you can decipher this, we'd like to talk to you. Well, if you phonetically read the letters at the top of the ad, it goes a little something like this. Fine. I'll have one more before I go home. And the ad is for a bartender. And the idea is the spirit of the restaurant, the spirit of the brand, the spirit of the type of people they're hoping to hire comes out in the job listing.
Never mind. I'm getting a national alert. This is a test.
Yes.
They must know that I have Joey Coleman on the show, and they're going, oh, my God, America, you must tune in right now. Sorry about that,
I love
Joey.
it. No worries at all, Park. No worries at all. So this ad comes out in the newspaper, and anybody reading the advertisement for the job position who is going to be a good fit is going to see that and smile. Or see that and laugh, or see that and say, that's the kind of place I want to work. Because in that opening description of the ad, it says that the brand doesn't take itself too seriously, that the restaurant is probably a fun place to work, and that they empathize and understand what one of the most challenging jobs of being a bartender is, dealing with customers who've had too much to drink. And so they encapsulate huge aspects of their story into the opening sentence of a job posting. And I think the reason I love that example, and there are many, many more that we could look to, it's that from the early communication, the first interaction that a potential or a prospective employee ever has with the Dallas Restaurant and Bar, they're getting a feel for that brand story.
Totally makes sense. When you said that, I was thinking about the Help Wanted ad written by Ernest Shackleton in 1912 to attract and retain top talent for his ship, the Endurance, which they went down to Antarctica, promptly got caught up in an ice shelf, destroyed the Endurance, and he spent, the next 1 or 2 years.
2 years.
Saving
2 years, Park.
2 years.
2 years stranded in Antarctica. I write about this in my newest book, Never Lose an Employee Again. This adventure. 2 years.
It's awesome. And if you've never seen the documentary, folks, you got to check it out. But here is his Help Wanted ad. I love it. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Ernest Shackleton. Now, Joey, if that's not someone telling an appropriate story to frame the story in the first place and really identify the kinds of men, in this case, he was looking for, I don't know what better example there is out there.
It really is a fun example, Park, and I agree with you. I mean, I think where we make a mistake as employers and as leaders is we sanitize the story. We think, I'm going to tell you the story that you want to hear, as opposed to, I'm going to tell you the story that is as close to nonfiction as possible, that it is accurately describing what it's going to be like to work here, what it's like in our organization, the type of things that matter to us, the type of people that succeed within our team. I think those are the stories we need to get better at telling.
So, Joey, now I want to look at the different kinds of stories. So say you just got done hiring 3 new employees, business is booming. You've got one in inbound marketing, you've got one in HR, and you've got one in supply chain. completely different,
Okay.
positions, but they're all trying to do the same thing in that they want to help the company succeed. And of course, they want to succeed in their own career. You brought them in. You probably shared a similar story, but from a different angle, depending on where they're coming into the organization. How does a leader then connect with those three completely different personalities, different positions, with storytelling without sounding like they're round pegging, square holing a story for each individual?
Well, I think we need to make a distinction, Park, between the stories we tell that are for everyone and the stories we tell that are for specific people. For example, I'm married and I have two sons who are 7 and 10. And I don't mean to say this disparagingly that we should treat our employees like children. But what I am saying is the story I will tell my wife about what we're doing next weekend might be different than the story I will tell my kids. Not because either story is true or untrue, but because I will choose to focus on the pieces of the story that are most relevant to them in this moment. The piece of the story that is most relevant to the person who's hearing it in this moment. Now, in your hypothetical where we've got somebody in inbound, somebody in HR, somebody in supply chain, the story of why we do what we do, the story of our vision, the story of what we're hoping to accomplish as an organization, the story about our core values, those stories should be told to all three of these people, and they should be told consistently and regularly. However, positioning a story for somebody in HR about the type of stories we want to make sure are being told to our recruits, to our new hires, to folks that are working through the process with us is very different than the story we might say to someone on the supply chain side of the house to have a story that they can tell to our vendors and our partners and our distributors, folks that might end up on the supply chain conversations. It's not that either story is right or wrong or good or bad. It's just they are nuanced based on the person listening to the story and the person that we're asking to tell the story.
All right. So in this fictional storytelling world we're in right now, let's advance 12 months, 1 year of employment. You have got that inbound marketer is killing it. They're fantastic. And you want to, I'm going to ask you, how do you amplify that story for them? But keep in mind too, you got the HR person who, boy, they're showing up, they're delivering, but they could be better. There's more talent there than they're actually, using in that role. And then finally, let's go to that poor supply chain dude who's just not living up to it, and he's got one more chance before you might have to let him go. How does your storytelling now work around those three different individuals and those three different circumstances?
Well, I'll indulge in the hypothetical, Park, but I do feel compelled to flag that if the next time you check in on the story you're telling to them is a year later, you've waited too long. You need to be having these conversations more regularly. But let's wave a magic wand. Presume they all were occurring throughout that year as well.
Well, let's be realistic. How many leaders actually do that? They welcome you in. It's great to be here. I'll see you in 12 months.
Well, and this is why, Park, 20 to 70% of new hires quit before day 100.
Say that again.
Yeah, 20 to 70% of new hires, depending on the role in your industry and where you're located in the world, will quit before they reach the 100-day anniversary of being hired.
And what is the cost of them quitting?
Well, we can measure it in dollars. We can measure it in emotions. We can measure it in loss of productivity, loss of efficiency, loss of morale, compounding effects on the other team members that are left behind. Any number of metrics we might measure associated with that loss of a new hire, especially that quickly, is devastating. To replace a new employee who is left cost you somewhere between 100 and 300% of their annual salary. So this isn't just a lovey-dovey, take care of the employees because we like them and they're part of our team. No, this cuts right to your bottom line. And if you're not keeping employees past the 100-day mark, past the 6-month mark, past the 1-year mark, you are costing your business hard dollars and soft dollars. So when you say, let's be honest what the reality is, I get that that's the way a lot of businesses behave. But if you want to be the employer of choice, if you want to not be dealing with retention issues across your team all day, every day, as a leader, you must invest more time into that new employee onboarding, into that employer-employee relationship, into one-on-ones with those people, into proper training for your management team to make sure that we are actually taking care of the most valuable, most important part of our entire business, which is the people who work here. I have people ask me all the time, because my first book was called Never Lose a Customer Again. My new book is called Never Lose an Employee Again. They're like, Joey, which is more important, the customer or the employee? And while many folks might say, well, they're both equally important, I disagree. The employee is more important. Because if you lose a customer, your ability to replace that customer with another customer is easier, faster, and more possible than finding another employee to come in and be up to speed as quickly, be producing value as quickly, be contributing to your culture as quickly. So we really got to pay attention to this stuff. But back to your hypothetical, if I may.
Exactly.
Okay?
We're now 12 months down the
12
road. I
months
haven't
down the
been
road.
paying attention. What do I do?
Inbound is doing an amazing job. We want to up their skills even more. HR's doing okay, but not that great. Supply chain, not getting it done. Inbound. The conversation with the inbound person a year in, when they've been hitting all the metrics and exceeding them and doing them well, needs to start to be about, where do you see your career going in the future? Because if that person is really succeeding at every step along the way, they're going to be wondering, what's my opportunity for promotion? What's my opportunity for more responsibility, more autonomy, more perks to being an employee, et cetera, et cetera. So the inbound person that's really performing well, we want to double down on making sure we're having conversations with them about those things that go beyond their job and performance and more to their professional career development. Now let's look at the HR person. They're doing okay, but not in all the areas we want them to do well in. We don't think they're maximizing their potential. I think there's two stories and two conversations to have here. Number one, reinforcing the things they're doing well. So many employers are quick to point out the shortcomings without ever reinforcing the successes that the employee is having. So we got to make sure we let them know, you're doing this is fantastic, it's remarkable, keep it up. We also need to have honest conversations about where maybe they're not performing or there's more potential. And here is an opportunity for hand-holding. It's not enough to say to an employee, you're not living up to your potential. We have to explain what we mean by that. We have to explain what we see that maybe they don't see. And we have to make sure that we've put in place the support structures, whether that's additional training, additional coaching, assistance, to help them start to see that thing in themselves that maybe we can see that they can't, or that level of performance that we believe they should be operating at that they're not operating at as in their current environment. Which brings us to the poor person in supply chain who's just not getting it done.
Well, hey, COVID, we all know the impact COVID has had. We have all kinds of excuses, Joey, as to why I'm not delivering on supply chain. What do I do next?
We do, and I believe the best organizations in the world get really clear on the difference between a reason and an excuse. So a reason, hey, our factory in China shut down and we couldn't get access to a boat for 6 months. That's a reason, not an excuse. An excuse is, well, supply chain, it's just tough times these days. No. Thank you for that broad assessment of the environment. Specifically, what is causing the problem here? So I think we got to get really clear on that. Now, leaning into the conversation with this individual, it sounds like, based on the hypothetical you teed up, they're just not performing. They're not performing in the way we want them to. They're not performing in a way that delivers on the roles and responsibility of their job. The question I would have before offering any advice here, Park, is this the kind of person that we think can still contribute value and impact in our organization? Or is this someone that it's just they're never going to be able to cut it? which would it be? In this hypothetical, which one would you rather have me address?
I want you to address the first one because I have faith that this young man can pull it off.
Fantastic. So if that's the case, we clearly have an example of the right person in the wrong role.
Mm-hmm.
If a year in, this person that we believe in, that we have a lot of faith in, we think they're a young man that's got a lot of possibility and potential, just isn't getting it done, it means one of two things. We failed to adequately prepare, train, and onboard them and give them the resources they needed to succeed. Or for some reason, their natural skill sets, their abilities, their talents don't ally with the position that they are in. And so there would be, I think, an opportunity to say, look, Jack, let's pretend their name is Jack. We like you a lot. We think you're great. It's not working over in the supply chain side. You're not happy. We're not happy. But we want to keep you as part of the team. Let's look at the other roles in our organization that we could explore. Let's get you out of supply chain and get someone into supply chain that is more excited, more able to do this role. And we migrate them to a different position in the organization. I think one thing that many employers struggle with is when an employee isn't succeeding in the role they're in. We have this binary view of, well, you're either good at work or you're not good at work. So if you're not good at this job, you're out. We got to fire them and go hire someone new. A year in, Jack in supply chain knows your culture, is contributing to your culture, gets how things work. We just have placed him in the wrong position. We just need to get him into a different role. And so I think being circumspect about how quick we are to pull the plug on a relationship and instead say, is this the right person just in the wrong spot in our organization?
Yeah, and I think of those three different kinds of stories, and I would categorize them. So that first one, that inbound marketing, Sarah is killing it, and we want to invite her into a vision story. Let's picture, Sarah, how we can get you to an even bigger impact in your career and in the company. And here's what that looks like for us. What does it look like for you? Make sure that you tell it from their point of view and you get them to co-create that story moving forward. Then let's move to HR, and we've got Tammy in HR, and she's got all the skills. We want to see her step it up just a little bit. And to me, that would be more of a transition story. Let's take you from where you are and the good work you're doing here, but we are going to transition you through this into this next level. Here's what that looks like and feels like for us. How does that work for you? And if we're not, in alignment there, then we can tweak that. But at least we're telling that transition story from Tammy's perspective. Then I think you named Jack as our supply chain guy, right? So Jack, we like Jack, but Jack is probably in the wrong position. So this would simply be an alignment story. Just as you had said, Joey, we've got you here. Maybe we didn't do our best job in training you up. Maybe we did do a fantastic job. It's just not working, but we know that you can add a lot to the success of this organization. So we're going to realign you. And in every case, it's a story of change. That vision story is here's where you are now. Let's make this leap forward to have even greater impact in your personal career and professional life here. That story of transition. We need to transition you into a bigger role. And that story of alignment. We need to change where you are now and move you over to something else. And so they take on this different genre of storytelling, but it's something that people can get their heads around.
Absolutely. The only thing I would add to that, Park, and I totally agree with kind of the categorization of the different stories. One thing that you said as an aside in this hypothetical that I think a lot of organizations latch onto is this idea of, well, we did the training and you're just not performing. We gave you everything you needed to do to perform and you're just not getting it done. If we actually gave them everything they needed, they would be succeeding. We're so quick as organizations to want to say, well, it's a failure of the individual, not a failure of the enterprise. It's a failure of your performance, not of our training and education. I think it would behoove us to start from a place of, What could we have done differently? I have an assistant who works for me who's absolutely amazing. She's my director of details. That's her title. Her title is an assistant, but some people might think of it as more of an assistant role. And not too long ago, we had a scenario where something didn't happen the way I thought it should happen. Now, I have two choices in that moment, Park. To blame her and say, she didn't do it right. Or to say, did I do everything possible to position her to do this the way I wanted it done? And as soon as I asked that question from a place of a non-emotional state, a pseudo-circumspective place, I immediately realized, oh my gosh, we have never had a conversation about this type of scenario. We've never had any type of feedback, any type of system, any type of process about this type of scenario. So who's that on? That's on me. That's not on her. I think our knee-jerk reaction as humans often is to say, well, clearly the other person messed up, instead of saying, what could I have done differently? Again, I bring the analogy back to raising children, right? And not to say our employees are children, but to say that if we approach our team members in the same way we might approach a young child, of saying, they only know what they know. It's my job to transmit the important things they need to know to succeed in this scenario. My son, at a young age, doesn't necessarily know if he jumps off the third floor of the house, this is going to have a horrible hospital-inducing consequence. It's my job to help explain that. It's my job to make sure that there's an understanding of the ramifications of our choices. The same can be held to be true with our employees. What are we doing to make sure they fully comprehend the ramifications of their performance or lack thereof in any particular moment, how that extends to the larger organizational enterprise?
Yeah, and as you had mentioned earlier, Joey, it's not that we are, positioning these people as kids, but they see the world as an employee different than you see the world as a leader. And I was going back to what you mentioned about if you're sharing a story in the family, and one popped up in my mind. Caden, our son Cade, who edits this show, so he's going to hear this right now.
Thanks for making it sound good, Cade. I love it.
Yeah, buddy. When he was a little lad, he's now 30 years old, so this was a while ago, we were living in Phoenix, Arizona, and my wife, Michelle, and I said, let's take the kids to the Botanical Desert Garden, the Desert Botanical Garden. It's a fabulous, one of the most spectacular city gardens you've ever seen, filled with all kinds of cacti and whatever, beautiful flowering, surprising plants and whatever. And so we got there and we looked, and our kids were all excited, and we looked at Cade, and he was kind of bummed out. And I go, Cade, what's the matter? He goes, well, I thought you said we were going to the Disney Mechanical Garden. And we had to laugh because, all right, we viewed it one way. He heard it something completely different. And boy, he was crestfallen by the time we showed up at the Desert Botanical Garden, not the Disney Mechanical Garden. And just a good example of what we think we're being clear at as a leader. Our audience employees can often hear something completely different.
100% Park. And even when we've repeated a message multiple times, I'm sure you said the Desert Botanical Garden more than once. It wasn't that he misheard it once. It's that he heard what he was excited about. Disney, not the desert. And our employees are the same way. When we explain, oh, here's what we're doing for the sales incentives, what they hear is trip to the Bahamas. They don't hear these type of clients booked in this time period leads to a trip to the Bahamas. They jump to the piece they want. And by the way, we as leaders do the exact same thing. We're constantly looking for the best version of the story that aligns with our worldview and our blueprint, not recognizing that every human on the planet is going to hear a story differently. And that's why it's important for us to be clear on our stories, to be consistent with our stories, and I would posit to continue telling our stories again and again to reinforce the points we're trying to get across.
So I'm going to go all Christopher Nolan on us and get out of this typical story flow where I usually start with your backstory. But this has been so much fun. We've just dived in. So now we're going to go to your backstory a little bit. This is your second book, right?
It is.
Your first one, How Not to Lose Customers. The second one, How Not to Lose Employees. How did you find yourself? How did you get into this world? And you had sent a little teaser to me to ask you about the debate team.
Yeah. So when someone asked me a question like, Joey, when did you first start telling stories? When did you first realize the power of story? I think as children, we love to tell stories. We love to tell stories of make-believe. We love to read fairy tales. We like to have those type of stories. But when the story meter, if you will, kind of shifted to a new gear for me was my freshman year of high school when I joined the high school debate team. And in that moment, and as part of that training and part of that competition, I started to realize that if you told a story a certain way, you could get a desired result with people you didn't know. It's one thing to tell mom the story a certain way, or tell dad, or tell one of the siblings a story, or a teacher. But on the debate team, I would walk into a room with a judge I had never met, going against opponents that I had never met. And the question becomes, who's better at telling the story to convince the judge that their version of the story is the right version of the story? And so it was reinforced over 4 years of being on the high school speech and debate team. After that, I went to college where it was reinforced in leadership roles I had in various student organizations. I then went straight to law school where it was reinforced again in the courtroom in leadership roles. And all throughout this period, the idea of story and the power of story and the power of rhetoric and the power of positioning and the power of which parts of the story do you tell and which points do you don't tell and how do you reveal certain aspects of the story, it kind of layered on itself. So when I became a full-time professional speaker and writer, I had already had a lot of story-esque experience that I could draw on as I thought about writing a chapter of a book or delivering a keynote or taking folks through a workshop.
Let's talk about then the frameworks of stories and how in your debate work, what was your aha moment? Can you take us to that time when you were debating one way and maybe it was the very first time you really nailed a story in one big time, and that was your aha moment, and you talked about the style of the story. So take us to that moment and explain to us the style of that story.
Well, I had an amazing debate coach, Mr. Maffin. He was absolutely world class. And one of the things that he would work on us with is the balance between the evidence you're presenting when telling a story and the rhetoric you're using to present the evidence. Now, there are many people, and I'm sure we've all experienced this in our personal lives. We have a friend or a spouse or a significant other or somebody in our lives who always wants to make it about the evidence, the proof. Here's the facts. Here's what happened. Usually they end up married or in relationship to someone who's all about the story and not about the facts. Now, let me tell you my vision of where this is going. Let me tell you what this could be. Neither is wrong, neither is right. In fact, they both have great value. And what I realized as part of the debate team is if I opened with a story that would draw people in and then presented a series of facts and evidence for the more logical left-brained thinking of the mind, and then came back to a right-brained story, and then went back to evidence, and then back to a story, and back to proof, and back to a tale, it could create kind of a blend of touch points for the listener to latch into what was most relevant to them or most compelling to them. And I try to do the same in my speaking today. I try to blend, here's what the data shows, here's what the research shows, and here's a story or an example of how you might apply that. It allows people to interact with both types of information. And I think this is where many businesses struggle. They either make their story all about the vision and the mission, or all about the tactics and the evidence. And again, it's not that either is bad. It's that you need a blend of both if you really want to succeed.
It really is a 1-2 punch, because I would argue that we buy, and when I say buy, it might be literally a product or service, or it could be buying into a vision, buying into a mission, buying into an initiative, buying into instruction someone's trying to get me to do to further my career or whatever. Whenever we're buying into something, we are typically first buying with emotion. How does that connecting with our heart? Does that feel right? Does it sound right? Like, can I get excited? Do I get goosebumps around that? And then we level that up to the logic, reason-driven brain and say, and now let me show you the evidence, or roll out the numbers or the data to prove the point I just made in the context of emotion. And at least in the sales world that I coach in and work in, that seems to me to be the most successful 1-2 punch, like you said. Start with the emotional context and then deliver the data to support that.
I certainly think it's the most common. My only caveat that I would offer to that observation, Park, is there are times where if the customer or the prospect wants the numbers and the evidence first, and we're so locked into, I got to tell you our vision and our story, we kill the sale before we get a chance to, because we haven't addressed the thing. So what I always tried to do is quickly get a read. Is there something that is so burning that they need to have answered right now before they'll hear anything else I say? Or do I have a little time to lead into this? And sometimes even in a workshop setting, I'll do this with clients. We'll have everybody in the room and I'll say, all right, we're going to be spending 4 hours together today. I have a vision of what I'd like us to cover. That is based on conversations I've had with the leadership team, what the goals of our training and where we're going. However, you were all invited to be here. And when you were invited to be here and you saw the description of the workshop, you probably had a vision of what you hoped would be covered and what your burning questions or needs were. Before we get into me, let's spend a little time with you. I've got a whiteboard up here, and I want you just to shout out the topics or the questions that you really hope will get covered in the next 4 hours. And Park, what I've found, having done this on all 7 continents, is that as soon as you get 2 or 3 things on the list, the train leaves the station. Now we've got 40 things on the list. Some people look at that and say, Joey, that's terrible, because now you've got to deliver on all these things. No, I didn't say we're going to talk about all of them, friends. Let's go back to what I actually said. Is there anything that you came to with an expectation? Is there anything prohibiting you from being fully present in the conversation? Now I can go through this list and say, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. This thing here, it's really important. We don't have time to fully get to it today in the way it needs to be addressed. So I'm going to put an asterisk by this one. I'll spend 2 minutes on it this afternoon, but then let's talk about having me back again to dive deep into the 3-hour conversation that this deserves. Now people feel seen, they feel heard, they feel appreciated. And now the story is built from what matters to them as opposed to what matters to me.
I love that. I do something very similar. And I learned about it the hard way by coming in, listening only to the leadership, jumping into a full day presentation, and then at lunch, having all of these other questions coming at me that this is what their team actually cared about. And I'm like, wow, leadership got it wrong. I got it wrong because I did not do what you said to do there. And that was my awakening moment. And now, yes, I do the exact same thing and almost present it the same way. Here's what I've heard. Now I want to hear from you. What I typically find, and maybe you find this too, Joey, as you're writing down those answers on the whiteboard, you start seeing trending within
Yes.
the team, don't you?
Yes,
And there's
100%.
usually 2 or 3 big items that you're going to cover that is going to cover 98% of everything else that people have talked about.
Park, it is
but
so
you've
true.
done what you said. You're listening.
Exactly. It is so true. And I think often the missed opportunity we have as human beings is to listen with a level of focus and intentionality to hear the thing that's behind the question. Hear the thing that's behind the statement. Going back to supply chain Jack. Oh, well, supply chain. Well, Jack, tell me more about that. What do you mean? Well, I feel really overwhelmed because I make 10 calls a day trying to find new suppliers for us, and they don't work, and I feel dejected. We might then say, oh, I was under the impression you were making 50 calls a day. Or I was under the impression you were making 1 call a day, and you're making 10. Ooh, I was grossly underestimating what you're... See, as leaders, we're often very quick to presume that people are doing it less than, as opposed to more than. And 9 times out of 10, in my experience, they're doing it the way they've either learned in a previous job, or we taught them, or we implied that they should do. Years ago, I had the pleasure of working with Zappos, right? Zappos has a call center where people call in with questions to place orders, etc. In most call centers around the world, the key metric they track is time on call. They want to know how quickly can you resolve the customer's need. And they track it, and they give out prizes for, oh, you were able to resolve that call, Park, in less than 3 minutes? Woohoo, you get a prize, you get a promotion, you get a reward. Zappos had this giant board with all their metrics. And one of their metrics they tracked was the longest call ever had. Now, at the time I was working with them, Park, the longest call was over 8 hours, a single call.
Wow.
And they celebrated that. And people would hear that and they're like, Joey, that sounds horrible for business. Oh, it's horrible for the productivity KPI of that call center rep during that day, but it is brilliant for relationship building. It is brilliant for retention, because you know what happened at the end of that 8-hour call? They had a customer for life. They had a customer who would then tell everyone they knew about how well they were taken care of. They had a customer who would go on social media and say, I can't believe it. I just spent 8 hours on the phone with Zappos. Look at all the things they did and all the ways they were able to help me. We want to be careful about the metrics we tell our employees are important to us versus how those align with our overall goals.
Totally makes sense. Joey, last question for you. Never Lose an Employee Again, a fantastic book. Quickly, give some takeaways to our audience. Why should they buy it, and how have you written it such that they can implement your insights immediately?
Well, a couple of thoughts. Number one, the book includes a framework that will help you completely revise how you think about the employee journey. Most employers haven't given enough thought as to all the elements of the employee journey. This breaks down a simple framework that is currently being used by businesses on all 7 continents in every industry you can imagine. So, moral of the story, it's time-tested and proven. Number 2.
Is that your like 8 steps, the
Correct.
8 phases?
8 phases of the employee journey.
Accept, affirm, activate, acclimate, accomplish, adopt, and advocate.
Correct.
That's a lot of A's.
It's a lot of A's, but if you get all of these right, it's like getting straight A's from your employees. They're grading you at a high level on everything you're doing. So that's number 1. Number 2,
that's awesome.
I can't not point out on the Business of Story podcast the number of stories in this book. There are over 50 case studies from all 7 continents in every industry you could imagine, stories of companies that are creating remarkable employee experiences that you can shamelessly steal, borrow, readapt to your world and apply. And then the third reason I would suggest folks get this is if you buy the book and you read the book and you get to the end of the book and you're like, yep, no value for me. Didn't get anything, wasn't worth my time, wasn't worth my investment. My email is in the book in multiple places. You send me an email and I personally refund the cost of the book. So it's literally at no cost to you. You don't have to go through Amazon or wherever you got to get a refund. I, Joey, will refund the money to you. That's how confident I am that every leader who reads this book will walk away with at least a handful of ideas that make the investment of time and money to buy and read the book well worth it.
I love it, Joey, and thank you so much for being here. I know you're a busy guy. I've got to release you to jump on yet another interview as you are on the book tour, no doubt at this point, but really appreciate you being here and great to meet you finally. I've heard you in action, social media marketing world and other places, but it's nice at least virtually to connect with you.
Oh, Park, I so appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation to come on the show, and a special thanks to all of you listening. So appreciate you joining in for the conversation. I hope you heard a story or two that you can apply in your business.
Hey, if you have an annual sales meeting coming up or planning one for early next year and you want to 10x the success of your team through storytelling, then please give me a call or shoot me a note to park@businessofstory.com. I'm here for you with proven in-person, virtual, and hybrid storytelling mastery courses and keynotes to help your people excel through the stories they tell. But my schedule's filling up, so you might want to reach out right away to park@businessofstory.com. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. It was edited by Caden Howell. Marissa Hill handles marketing and community development. And our music, of course, is composed by the one and only Darius Holbert. Join us next Monday when sales phenom and author of Sales Superpowers, Justin Michael, will be here to share his new outbound operating system to drive explosive pipeline growth for your brand. Until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.